Welcome, everybody. So what a fabulous opportunity to talk to Jonathan about his obsession with Gilbert and George, because Gilbert and George inspire obsession, I think. How did you become obsessed with them? It was just after you arrived from Northern Ireland, wasn't it?
Yeah, no, I think when I first moved to London, I think I remember getting their books in a second-hand shop, and I just became, I don't know, I think this idea of queer culture, there was something where, well, they look fantastic. There's something that grips you by them, and they're kind of oddly, I grew up in Northern Ireland, and in Northern Ireland we're very good at murals for other reasons. And I think there's something about the idea of the mural that I quite it's like they have the political message.
You're drawn to perversity, though,
Yeah.
and there's something immediately perverse about what
Yes.
Gilbert and George do.
Yeah, well, there is a kind of British thing which there is no boundary somehow. It has a decor, but at the same time, there's no boundary. It can go quite far and challenge. When we were speaking to them, they were saying that they remember a point when they were doing I think a radio station, and there was a priest that was not very happy about their work and was incredibly angry about them. That was their connection to Ireland. So, but it was interesting just how they kind of now, in a weird way, when we look at it, it's kind of normal. It's less controversial, but in its time, was incredibly controversial.
I don't know, I like this point that they made, or somebody made, that in their suits, in their very structured public life,
Yeah.
very kind of seemingly conventional, the suits are actually more about BDSM than they are about,
Yeah.
a conservative existence, even though they are conservative-ish.
To a point, I think, there's something, when I saw them, they were wearing Donegal tweed, and it was like a kind of amazing mottled, and there was something where you think very quintessential. But when you kind of see the logic, there is not a quintessential logic. So it's a kind of like, it's a very kind of, it's sort of like, you have to double take, because what they're saying is kind of juxtaposing who they are somehow. And I think with that, they become kind of style icons, as well at the same time as they have like a contradiction to their work. So they are nearly a contradiction to their work as much as how they live. But there's something in that I think becomes twisted, which I think is important.
Is that? Do you think that's what you responded to, like right off the bat? That there's the form of their work is very, well, it's very formal, grids and it's a very structured work, but the content is so extreme.
Yeah.
So there's this tension, and that seems to me to be something that is very typical of your work as well. There are tensions between very obvious contradictions in your work and in theirs.
Yeah, because I think for me, I work on tension, if you know what I mean. I even work on tension when I work with people. I like people to challenge me, or I like things that maybe are not correct. Do you know what I mean? Sometimes you have to, it's like I remember doing a collection out of corduroy, and I hate corduroy. And it was like a real, like every time we would go to do it, it would always drop out. And I remember like one time in the end, I just thought it like a fetish. It's something like, it's disturbing, so why not just create an entire collection out of it? And then it actually became a collection I loved. But there was so much like nervousness of doing that collection that, that you didn't think it was going to work because you didn't like it. And I think that sort of tension of like being able to kind of put yourself out of depth, or even looking at things that are controversial in terms of, are they the right moment to be doing them? Are they, I remember when we were shooting with Alistair, we shot a lot of nudity, and it was a moment where probably it was not the right moment to be doing it. But sometimes I feel like you have to challenge the status quo on things. You have to kind of put yourself out of the depth, or in the end, you just love yourself, and then it's over.
But do you think you thrive on disturbance a little bit?
Yeah, I think some of my favorite artists of all time like to go close to the line. They like to toy with like their own kind of insecurities and things, or insecurities that are happening culturally, because that's where you find newness. Do you know what I mean? I think in art, what is so fantastic about art as a medium is that it actually kind of gets into the idea of insecurities, and then that is where you find new ways of seeing things, or that's when art goes out of fashion, comes back. Do you know what I mean? There's this amazing relationship between art and fashion that has that. It's like one minute we are into something and then it falls out of fashion, but then it comes back because maybe politically that moment is right. Do you know? It's sort of that's what I love, is that kind of discovery of things that maybe I don't understand, but then through the process I have to understand.
Well,
it.
do you think that this moment is right for Gilbert and George then?
Yeah, I think.
Well, why do you think that?
Because I think Britain is going through an incredibly divisive moment. I think we're in a very difficult period where there is no leadership. There is no kind of London and the countryside do not match. It's an island, and then you have the rest of Britain. It's a very tricky moment, and there's not a strong enough personality to lead it. So you have the situation we're in now. And I think what is interesting about when you look at Gilbert and George's work, they look at cultural society and they distill it into a piece of work. And I feel like sometimes it can be a kind of a personal exploration, and sometimes I think it can be a political message without them knowing, because I think it's just them seeing the world. Do you know what I mean? It's them going to work or going, walking from Spitalfield up to Hackney, and I feel like through that process they see what's happening. It's not like they are living in Mayfair. They are living in the thick of it.
I feel very much like they chronicle the decline and fall.
Yeah.
There's a lot in their work that is about social decay,
yeah,
and collapse and violence. I'm curious about how, when you approach that enormous spectrum of work that they've done, how you isolate the images that you feel will translate into your designs.
Well, I don't know. There was the three images which we have in here. When we were doing when I came up with the idea that I was like, okay, now is the moment that we should ask. I've always liked these three images. I think ultimately the one that says heavy, I've always loved the guy. I've always loved the kind of, there's something quite like humbling about that, but there's something pensive, and there's something that you want to be drawn in by.
The little poetic boy who looks like David Bowie.
Yeah, and there's something just sort of like, I love that period. That's one of my favorite periods in the 80s. And then it kind of, this one for me was something incredibly fetishistic about it. And I had this vision of it being on a leather jacket, that there was something a bit kind of perverse, that in the period that this was done, I could have seen a kind of leather daddy in it, and there would have been something where you merged these two things, you know what I mean? And it kind of, and then we put nautical kind of ropes on it. And I just thought there was something very it was iconography. It was like this idea you could see three people wearing the same jacket on the street, and there would be something quite, some sort of aggressively rebellious.
Well, for you to take that particular image of the face that we see all around us, it's the most homoerotic image, probably. Yeah. And then put it on a black leather jacket. Push that whole idea. Yeah. That's taking something they did and kind of filtering it through your own, fascination with the soft white underbelly of society.
But I think I think ultimately the characters that they do pick up on are the most fascinating people in society. It's not the kind of, they're not Beyonce, but they are people that have got the influence that influences everyone else, because it's sort of like the dream of who you want to be. I look at him and I want to look like that. Even though that picture was taken in the 80s, I want to be that person. I want to be wearing jeans and a pair of boxers and be able to be that naive. Do you know what I mean? There's something that is like storytelling about it, that, it's like the dog boy is sort of like, how relevant is that person now today.
He looks like a million people you'd see in the street.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think...
He doesn't so much.
You know, and he doesn't so much. But that's what I kind of think is so fascinating about that. And there's so many bodies of work that they have done that really are incredibly kind of like seductive. I think that's why they are incredibly, I think they're one of the most important modern artists that we have in Britain. You know, as much as we have Hockney, I think, you know, Gilbert and George for me are the birth of modern art in this kind of like blockbuster, kind of in your face, non-compromising. And at the same time, there's something so incredibly romantic. They've been together for so long. And for me, it's like this incredible love story that, you know, how amazing to be dedicated to each other for that. Like, you know, to be able to stay with someone every day is quite a trip. And I think that's admirable. And I think in a weird way, you have the work and then you have them, and, you know, which is their work of art in themselves. In a weird way, like when you look at Warhol, when I think of Warhol, I think Warhol's best work was himself. I don't think I like the work, but I think him as a character, it's like a Rubik's Cube.
I think you keep them, I think Gilbert and George keep themselves and the work separate. Warhol kept himself and the work separate. I think you talk about Seduction, and what's interesting, seeing the Warhol show in New York, seeing this, and also being aware of a sort of Gilbert and George moment just rising in popular culture, that there's an enormous seduction attached to transgression. And I think the notion of resistance is becoming very popular. There's a lot to resist. Yeah. And transgression seems like a sort of kind of a romantic way forward in a way.
Yeah.
Do you feel that, you know, fashion gets kind of lambasted for all sorts of, you know, all sorts of namby-pamby lack of response to things, or you know, illusions and not engaging with the situation that's around now. But do you feel that bringing Gilbert and George into your work is a way of engaging with reality? Yeah,
because I think it's tangible. You can kind of grip it. We all know the work, or most people know the work, so it surrounds us. It's a familiarity, but when you start to kind of cross, I'm a firm believer that, like, you know, I did a show at the Hepworth, which was this idea that you strip away hierarchies in terms of creative output, and I think as much as there is a lot of collaborations, I think collaborations are important, because I think you learn from them. You kind of are able to, I feel like, as much as Gilbert and George are incredibly famous, and they're incredibly well known, I think they're sometimes incredibly underrated. You know, I think their work that they have done has changed things, you know. And I think through that, I like to be able to, I'm really honored to be able to try to, like, bring that dialogue of when I look at Britain now, I think of Gilbert and George. I don't know why. And it might be this idea of the demise. It might be this idea that there is people rising up from beneath, you know? And I think, and plus it's a people's voice. It's very different types of people. There is not a hierarchy. It's a very kind of, they're characters. And I think there's something in that. I feel that when I was working, I felt I could never have created an artwork that would have been able to do it. So it was better just to go to the source, you know what I mean? As a kind of, as a message.
How did they respond when you approached them?
Well, I was worried they were going to say no, like flat out. And we kind of got in contact, and slowly but surely they were into the idea. And I remember talking to Andrew and my team and being like, I can't believe this is happening. You know, this is like, you know, some people, you know, we've worked with different people, and it has been very kind of like effortless. It's been very kind of gracious somehow. It's been kind of, and when I met them, and it was kind of like, it was not what I expected, but more. You know, it was kind of.
How so?
because they were intrigued, and I thought they wouldn't have been intrigued in the idea of clothing, as much. And I thought, and they really wanted to, they were very liberating. Like, they've let us do this, and they've really let us go for it. And I feel like, I think that's, incredibly kind, if you know what I mean.
See, what I do love about the collaboration is that you have such a respect for the artisan and such a love of what the human hand makes. You're kind of quite unique in fashion for this the craftiness of what you do for yourself and for Loewe. And it does make these, and your own art pieces, the things you make. It's really interesting seeing the way you have infused your DNA with theirs. I think that there's a crafty element, a sort of beady, fringy, collagey.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting that they would be okay with that, when you think about how controlled their work is.
But I wanted it to be something that, I feel like if I was to go out and buy a Gilbert and George, there is a uniqueness to it. So I felt whatever we made had to live up to that. So it couldn't alter it, but it had to add to it. And I kind of was like, if this kid was to have a backpack, what would it be? So I then was going through the archive, and we did these very large kind of backpacks, which were based on military backpacks. And they're just like a big flap. And I kind of like this idea that this sort of like kid is walking down Soho with this massive backpack on, with a white t-shirt and a pair of boxers, and this like jingly kind of like the beads are like the ones that you buy where you go to make like friendship bracelets and things. And I just thought it had to be something that was like a kind of crafted reality. But when you saw it on the street, it was going to be as amazing as it would have been in a museum. It had to feel like a contradiction to the landscape.
And what did they say when they saw that particular piece?
Well, that we sent all the things through for their approval, and they were, on everything, they just were like, we'll go for it.
Well, that's one thing it's one thing that surprised me when I read this about them, that they're very, very happy to see their work translated into another, so it's embraced by another audience.
Yeah.
And so we're talking about them being separate from what they do. They actually do see their work as something that has a life of its own.
Yeah. That it becomes, I think when we were talking, what I thought was interesting is this idea that it becomes part of a reality. It's like you kind of take this and it goes, there's something like, when they do sometimes when they do the kind of campaigns for the show and they have like flyer posters, when they did the flyer poster show, and you have it everywhere. There's something about them where it's like, you do see them walking to go to a restaurant. There is not like, pardon me, like an ivory tower. It's not like kind of like the elusive. They are part of London. They're kind of like, when you go to London, you go to see like amazing things that are happening. They are part of that. So.
We're actually going to ask the audience for questions now.
Cool.
I was just going to say that we're going to ask you what you learned from the experience, but maybe somebody else will ask you that. So. Far be it from me. Do you have a microphone? Yeah. Wow, you're all packed in there. I am so hot. Are you hot? Oh.
Hi, I just wanted to ask you how you manage your time between Loewe and your own brand. I mean, is it 50-50 or?
Gilbert and George.
Yeah, I don't know how well, it is incredibly complex. I have amazing teams, two incredible teams that make sure that I know where I have to be on a day. But I enjoy it, so it doesn't, I feel like I could do more. I know it sounds a weird thing. I feel like I'm one of these people that just like if I'm not doing something, something's wrong. Like I was in Miami yesterday. I'm now here. I will go to New York next week. And I enjoy it because I feel like it is part of me. I think there's like a nervous tension that means I have to be working. So I'm managing, if that makes sense. Still smiling.
So what did you learn from Gilbert and George?
I think what I kind of loved and what I learned is that they are their own person. Like when I went to meet them in their home, I loved that they had their own obsessions with like arts and crafts furniture, and I love arts and crafts furniture, and I thought I never expected that. And I loved that they were kind of, there was a privacy to the individual and then a kind of blockbuster to the individual, which I think was sort of kind of, I've never met someone like, two people like that, where it was like very demure, but at the same time incredibly big. So in a weird way, it's like their books, they become like this, but ultimately the images are huge, and they're kind of these two characters that are incredibly intimate, but they are huge in terms of the volume. And I think I really admire that kind of like, to be able to live in one state and to produce this. It's like, you know, it was sort of interesting, it was quite Georgian, Dickensian. And then to see all the color, it was kind of like, it was quite amazing to have this like completely, like it was like if you were to say that this home was this person and did they produce the art, you would say no.
So you're young and they're not. And I just wondered if spending time with them gave you a sense of life beyond fashion, that you could see, wow, I could do this like in 50 years.
I don't think I could do that, but
or something
I could, you know, I've always, you know, I've always liked anything like craft or art or you know, anything that's made ultimately. But I think I'm more of a facilitator. I think I'm a very good person to kind of, I would never want to make it, but I'm very good at enjoying it. Like I can really get behind it, and I feel like I see myself more as a curating of things than say going to make a pot or to make a mural. I would not be capable of that. Plus it would be just incredibly greedy. And I think when you meet these people who are heroes, they're heroes to me, it's kind of like you are in your own time period. I think that's what when you look at sometimes at like, I don't know, like at Hollywood, or you look at artists in the 40s, or you look at any sort of time period, or like even Elizabeth I, you're thinking, how amazing it must have been. And I think sometimes when you meet people like this, you kind of go, I am so happy to be in the present. Look, this is what's happening now. And I think the most important thing through this collaboration is like, what is happening now? You know, not the past, what is now and what can happen. So whatever happens with this, then you're on to the next, and maybe the person who wears this on the street, they take it somewhere else, or it inspires something else.
Now that's a fabulously optimistic point for somebody to build on as we head towards our grand finale.
Yeah.
Questions? One more question?
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. I'm really curious to hear how you separate mentally when you're designing for Loewe versus JW.
The way in which I do it is, there's two ways. One is a physical way, which is they're both in two different countries. One involves a Eurostar, which you have to entertain yourself somehow. So it's sort of like, I feel like I change character by the time I get there. One is me, and the other is me looking after a very old brand. Do you know what I mean? It's sort of like, I went to Loewe, it was incredibly dusty. It needed a lot of work. I had to become more business oriented than I ever had to be. I had to get a lot of stamina to try to turn it. Whereas in my own brand, it was more instinctive. It's me somehow, you know, whereas in Loewe, it's a very kind of, my name is not above the door. It is a kind of, and I feel like in the product, I always see that J.W. Anderson is more of like a cultural agitator. It's kind of annoying sometimes. It's there to annoy. Whereas like in a weird way, Loewe has to be a little bit more softer and a little bit more polite. And I feel like as two physical characters, that's how I kind of, there's things that I would never do in Loewe, but I would do in JW. And they can be really subtle, like it's sort of even down to buttons. There's certain buttons I would never use at JW Anderson that we use at Loewe. And I think there's a different hand. Plus, Loewe is a leather house, really, and we have only started. You know, we've been going for 10 years, and I feel like it's only the beginning. If you think Loewe's been going from 1846, so I'm hoping, you know, at some point someone's going to kind of, you know, think I'm really dusty and make it better.
With a leather man.
With a leather daddy.
With a leather daddy. Well, Loewe, home of the leather daddy. Are we out of time now? We are.
Sorry, we're out of time.
Okay,
We are.
perfect.
Do we have time for one more question?
Yeah.
One more question.
Yeah.
I'm sure everybody knows already here. Were you the starting point of Loewe being interested in craft, or did I miss something there? You know, all the
yeah.
engagement with craft and
With craft.
interesting making.
Yeah.
Was it you, or was that something that started before you?
I have been collecting craft, or I don't really see it as craft, but we used it as a word because I was kind of getting. When I joined Loewe, we had a poetry prize, which was for the Spanish language, and it's become quite an important prize for the Spanish language in poetry. And I was like, well, if you have a foundation and I'm here, then it should be something that I love poetry, but I really love craft. And I looked, and I've always wanted to do it because I felt like there was never a platform for it. And I think it's probably, in terms of Loewe, it's probably the thing that's most me, if that makes sense, because it's something that I adore. So, thank you. Cool.
Okay, that is it. Then.
Brilliant.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you. Perfect. Cool.